This is the first case on the list. The Matthew Kinna case, Oxford, Mississippi. On the 19th of May, 2019, in Oxford, Mississippi, a 32-year-old mother of 4, named Dominique Clayton, was found dead in her bedroom. She had been shot once in the head while she slept. The person responsible was not a stranger or an intruder in the traditional sense. It was Matthew Kinna, a patrol officer with the Oxford Police Department, a man who had sworn to protect the very community he would terrorize. Kinna was white, Clayton was black, and their secret affair had spiraled into an act of violence that would shock the college town and raise troubling questions about who is entrusted with power. Matthew Kinna came from a background typical of many who enter law enforcement in the American South. He began his law enforcement career not in Oxford, but in nearby Olive Branch, Mississippi, where he worked as a police officer. To outsiders, Kinna appeared to be a conventional public servant, building a career in uniform, starting a family, and presenting an image of stability. But behind that image, warning signs were already present. Before Matthew Kinna ever joined the Oxford Police Department, his career in Olive Branch ended abruptly. He was allowed to resign from the department following an internal investigation. The exact circumstances surrounding that investigation were not made public at the time, but later civil lawsuits filed by Dominique Clayton's family alleged that concerns about Kinna's conduct should have disqualified him from future law enforcement employment. Rather than being formally terminated, Kinna resigned, a decision that allowed him to seek employment elsewhere. In 2015, he applied to the Oxford Police Department. Despite questions surrounding his departure from Olive Branch, Oxford hired him. He remarried, had 2 children, and began patrolling a town known for the University of Mississippi and its quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods. For 4 years, Matthew Kinna served as an Oxford patrol officer. To colleagues and the public, he seemed like an ordinary uniformed presence in a small department. But behind the badge, Kinna was living a double life. While maintaining the appearance of a devoted husband and father, he began an extramarital relationship with Dominique Clayton, a young black woman and single mother working to support her 4 children. The relationship was conducted in secrecy, shielded by Kinna's position and the trust that came with his badge. According to statements made by Clayton's family in later legal filings, Kinna exerted influence and control over her life. Family members said Clayton attempted to end the relationship multiple times and expressed fear of Kinna, particularly as the pressure of secrecy intensified. She told relatives she was pregnant and worried about what might happen if Kinna's wife discovered the affair. What may have begun as a relationship had become something far more dangerous. By the spring of 2019, the situation was unraveling. Dominique Clayton wanted out. She confided in family members about her fears and about Kinna's increasingly possessive behavior. For Kinna, exposure threatened everything: his marriage, his career, and the authority he had worked to preserve. Prosecutors would later argue that, faced with the collapse of his carefully constructed life, Kinna made a calculated decision to silence the woman who could reveal the truth. On the night of the 18th of May 2019, Matthew Kinna was wearing his Oxford Police Department uniform and driving his marked patrol vehicle. At some point during the night, he went to Dominique Clayton's home on Suncrest Drive in the Brittany Woods subdivision. Evidence later presented by prosecutors showed that Kinna entered the residence while Clayton was asleep. He retrieved his department-issued firearm and shot her once in the head. The shot was fatal. There was no struggle, no confrontation. Surveillance footage later captured Kinna's police cruiser leaving the subdivision in the early morning hours. The following afternoon, May 19, Dominique Clayton's 8-year-old son returned home and made a discovery no child should ever have to endure. He found his mother's body in her bedroom and called for help. Emergency responders arrived, but it was immediately clear that this was a homicide. As investigators began piecing together Clayton's final hours, they uncovered evidence that she had been involved in a relationship with a member of the Oxford Police Department. Recognizing the seriousness of the conflict of interest, Interim Police Chief Jeff McCutcheon contacted the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation to take over the case. By Monday, the 20th of May 2019, Matthew Kinna was arrested and charged with murder. He was terminated from the Oxford Police Department shortly after his arrest. According to prosecutors, Kin admitted to having a relationship with Clayton and acknowledged entering her home on the night she was killed. The investigation moved swiftly once the evidence pointed inward. In the days that followed, allegations surfaced that misinformation had initially been shared with Clayton's family regarding the circumstances of her death claims that later became part of a civil wrongful death lawsuit. 2 other officers resigned from the Oxford Police Department in the weeks after the killing, though they were not criminally charged. The community reaction was immediate and intense. Clayton's family demanded accountability not only from Kin, but from the system that had allowed him to remain in uniform. Interim Chief McCutcheon issued a public statement emphasizing that the badge would not shield wrongdoing and that justice for Dominique Clayton was the department's priority. On the 30th of August 2019, a Lafayette County grand jury indicted Matthew Kinney on a charge of capital murder, the most serious homicide charge under Mississippi law, carrying the possibility of either death or life in prison without parole. Clayton's family publicly supported the death penalty. Dominique's mother and relatives attended court proceedings consistently, ensuring that her name and her life were not forgotten. Kin pleaded not guilty during his arraignment in September 2019. The case then moved slowly through the court system, delayed by procedural issues and the complexity of preparing a capital murder trial. In July 2021, as a trial date approached, Matthew Kinney changed course. On the 30th of July 2021, in a Union County courtroom in New Albany, Mississippi, he pleaded guilty to capital murder. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Circuit Court Judge Kent Smith sentenced Kin to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the hearing, prosecutors outlined the evidence they would have presented at trial: surveillance footage, admissions, and the sequence of events that led to Clayton's death. Defense attorneys attempted to frame the killing as an emotional breaking point, but prosecutors described it as a deliberate act carried out by a man who used his position, his uniform, and his weapon to commit murder. Matthew Kin was immediately taken into custody by the Mississippi Department of Corrections. In May 2022, a federal judge awarded Dominique Clayton's 4 children approximately $2.2 million in a wrongful death judgment against Kin. The court found that his actions were intentional, willful, and reckless. The lawsuit also raised serious questions about hiring practices and accountability within the Oxford Police Department, questions that continue to resonate far beyond this single case. The case of Matthew Kinney is a study in betrayal at every level. A woman trusted a man who wore a badge and he killed her. A police department entrusted power to an officer who abused it. A system meant to protect instead became a pathway to violence. Dominique Clayton was 32 years old, a mother of 4, trying to build a future for her children. Her life was taken by someone who believed authority would shield him from consequences. Justice came in the form of a prison sentence, but nothing can restore what was stolen. The badge, the trust, the power, all of it became weapons, and the cost was Dominique Clayton's life. Case number 2. Bobby Lee Cutts, Jr., Canton, Ohio. On the 14th of June 2007, a 9 months pregnant woman named Jessie Marie Davis vanished from her home in Canton, Ohio. She was 26 years old, the mother of a 2-year-old son, and just days away from giving birth to her second child. Before we proceed, if you're drawn to carefully researched true crime stories that go beyond the headlines, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. New cases like this one are released regularly, and your support helps keep these stories told. Bobby Lee Cutts was born on the 21st of May, 1977, in Canton, Ohio. He grew up in the same region where he would later serve as a police officer, raised in a working-class environment where law enforcement represented stability, respect, and opportunity. Those who knew him described him as confident and socially adept, someone who knew how to present himself well. He was athletic, personable, and capable of gaining trust easily, traits that would later play a significant role in both his career and his relationships. In his early 20s, Cutts decided to pursue law enforcement, completing the required training and positioning himself for a career built on authority and public trust. Cutts joined the Canton Police Department in 2000 after completing training at the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. He worked patrol duties, responding to calls and interacting with the community on a daily basis. There were no publicly documented major disciplinary issues during his early years. To colleagues, he appeared functional and professional, though notably private. He rarely discussed his personal relationships in detail. For 7 years, Cutts maintained the outward image of a stable police officer. Privately, however, his life was increasingly divided. Bobby Cutts Jr. was married to his wife, Kelly. By the mid-2000s, their marriage was strained, and the two were separated, living apart. They had discussed divorce, but no legal divorce had been finalized at the time of the crime. In 2003, Cutts began a relationship with Jessie Davis, a woman who worked at a local credit union. Jessie believed that Cutts's marriage was effectively over and that their relationship had a future. In 2004, Jessie became pregnant. She gave birth to their son, Blake. Cutts was involved in Blake's life and presented himself as a caring father, but he remained legally married. Despite the separation from his wife, Cutts continued to live a divided life, maintaining different versions of the truth and avoiding full accountability. By 2007, Jessie was pregnant again, and the uncertainty she had tolerated for years was no longer acceptable to her. As Jessie's due date approached, tension escalated. She wanted clarity, commitment, and stability for herself and for her children. For Cutts, the pressure was mounting. His separation from his wife had not resolved his situation. His relationship with Jessie was no longer controllable. Exposure threatened his personal life, his career, and his reputation as a police officer. Prosecutors later argued that Cutts saw his circumstances as closing in around him and that he chose a violent solution rather than face the consequences of his actions. In the early hours of the 14th of June, 2007, Bobby Cutts went to Jessie Davis's home. Jessie's 2-year-old son, Blake, was inside. A violent encounter occurred. Jessie Davis was killed, along with her unborn daughter. Due to decomposition, the medical examiner could not conclusively determine the precise cause of death, but investigators concluded both deaths occurred inside the home. Afterward, Cutts wrapped Jessie's body in a comforter and removed her from the house, leaving Blake alone. He drove approximately 25 miles to Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Summit County, where he concealed Jessie's body in a wooded area, covering it with brush and debris. He then returned to his normal routine. Later that day, Jessie Davis's mother arrived at the home for a scheduled visit. When no one answered, she entered and found alarming signs. Jessie's purse, phone, and keys were still inside. The house appeared disturbed. Most troubling of all, Blake was alone, frightened, and hungry. Police were called immediately. As the investigation unfolded, detectives learned about Bobby Cutts, Jessie's boyfriend, the father of her child, and a Canton police officer who was legally married but separated. Cutts told investigators he had last seen Jessie the night before, but his account shifted. Cell phone records and witness statements contradicted his version of events. Blake's statements, delivered in simple, childlike language, further raised concern. On the 23rd of June, 2007, Jessie Davis's body was found in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Cutts ultimately led investigators to the location. Bobby Cutts Jr. was arrested on the 23rd of June, 2007. He was charged with murder for Jessie Davis, aggravated murder for her unborn daughter, gross abuse of a corpse, burglary, child endangering. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement circles. A sworn officer had become the accused. Cutts was suspended and later resigned from the Canton Police Department. His wife, Kelly, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. The trial began in February 2008. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, cell phone records, and recordings of Cutts's inconsistent statements. They portrayed a man overwhelmed by deception and responsibility. Cutts testified in his own defense, claiming Jessie's death was accidental and that he panicked afterward. The jury rejected his account. He was found guilty of murder for Jessie Davis and aggravated murder for the death of her unborn daughter, along with the remaining charges. The jury declined to impose the death penalty. On the 27th of February 2008, Bobby Cutts was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 57 years, plus additional consecutive sentences. He remains incarcerated in Ohio. His appeals have been denied. The Bobby Cutts Jr. case illustrates how separation, secrecy, and avoidance can still culminate in devastating consequences. Jessie Davis believed honesty and accountability were possible. Instead, her trust was met with violence. Her unborn daughter never had a chance at life. A child lost his mother, a family was shattered, and a police officer's carefully managed double life ultimately collapsed. Justice ensured that Bobby Cutts' story would not end in secrecy but behind prison walls where it belongs. Case number 3. Drew Peterson, Bolingbrook, Illinois. Two women entered the life of a trusted police officer, and neither would escape unscathed. One was found dead in a bathtub. Her death ruled an accident. The other vanished without a trace, leaving behind a home, a car, and a silence that still haunts investigators. Behind the badge meant to protect, a predator was hiding in plain sight. Drew Peterson was a police sergeant with the Bolingbrook Police Department in Illinois, a familiar face in this quiet suburb southwest of Chicago. But behind the uniform lay a pattern of manipulation, control, and violence that would ultimately destroy two women. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the calculated way Peterson exploited his position as a law enforcement officer to evade justice. He knew how crime scenes were processed, how investigations unfolded, and he used that knowledge to stage what appeared to be an accident. Born in 1954 inches, Bolingbrook, Peterson enlisted in the Army after high school and trained as a military police officer in Virginia. This training gave him intimate knowledge of police procedures that he would later exploit. He joined the Bolingbrook Police Department and worked his way up to sergeant over nearly 30 years. To his colleagues, he was an experienced officer, but warning signs emerged early. Between 2002 and 2004, police were dispatched to his residence 18 times for domestic disturbances. His wives complained of controlling behavior, jealousy, and threats. Yet Peterson remained on the force, his authority unchallenged. Peterson's personal life was marked by a disturbing pattern. He married 4 times, each relationship following the same trajectory of initial charm, followed by control and accusations. In 1992, he married Kathleen Savio. They had 2 sons, but Peterson was already planning his exit. In 2001, while still married to Kathleen, the 47-year-old Peterson began pursuing Stacey Ann Cales, a 17-year-old hotel receptionist. As night commander, he would check on her during patrols, using his position to gain access and trust. The age gap was staggering, 30 years separated them. In October 2001, Kathleen received an anonymous letter detailing her husband's affair with the teenager. The letter revealed the affair had become a joke within the police department. Peterson faced no professional consequences. His marriage to Kathleen deteriorated into bitter divorce proceedings. The couple fought over custody and assets. Kathleen became increasingly fearful. She filed an order of protection and wrote letters expressing her fear that Peterson would kill her. She stated clearly that if anything happened to her, Peterson would be responsible. The divorce became official in October 2003, but financial disputes remained. Just 8 days later, the 49-year-old Peterson married 19-year-old Stacey, but the financial entanglement with Kathleen remained an unacceptable threat to his new life. The motive was forming. On the evening of the 1st of March 2004, less than 5 months after marrying Stacey, Drew Peterson murdered Kathleen Savio in her Bolingbrook home. Forensic evidence would later reveal she was attacked, struck in the head, and her body bore extensive bruising consistent with being forcibly held. The injuries indicated a struggle. Peterson overpowered and drowned her, then carefully placed her body face down in a dry bathtub, staging it to appear as though she had slipped and fallen. The staging was deliberate, informed by his years of training in crime scene investigation. The following day, a neighbor found Kathleen's body. The bathtub was dry, her hair soaked with blood. The initial investigation was cursory. In May 2004, a coroner's jury ruled her death an accidental drowning. The case was closed, exactly as Peterson had planned. He had gotten away with murder. For 3.5 years, Peterson lived freely. But by 2007, Stacey had grown weary of his controlling behavior. She wanted a divorce and feared for her safety. Then, on the 28th of October 2007, 23-year-old Stacy Peterson vanished. Peterson claimed she left him for another man, but investigators suspected foul play. The disappearance of his fourth wife prompted authorities to re-examine his third wife's death. Kathleen's body was exhumed in November 2007. Dr. Larry Blum conducted a new autopsy. His conclusions contradicted the original ruling entirely. The bruises were inflicted within 24 hours of death. The abrasions could not have been caused by a bathtub. Most significantly, Blum found evidence consistent with forceful drowning. In February 2008, the manner of death was changed to homicide. On the 7th of May 2009, Peterson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His arrest made national headlines. The public was outraged that a law enforcement officer had used his position to commit and conceal murder. The trial began in July 2012. The prosecution presented forensic evidence detailing injuries inconsistent with an accidental fall. They used a controversial new Illinois law that allowed hearsay statements from unavailable witnesses, presenting Kathleen's statements about her fear of Peterson. On the 6th of September 2012, Peterson was found guilty. In February 2013, he was sentenced to 38 years in prison. But prison did not end his crimes. In 2015, authorities discovered Peterson had attempted to arrange the murder of the prosecutor who convicted him. On the 31st of May 2016, he was convicted of solicitation of murder. He received an additional 40 years, bringing his total sentence to 78 years. Drew Peterson, now 70, will almost certainly die in prison. Multiple appeals have been denied. Meanwhile, Stacy Peterson remains missing. Her family believes she is dead, and Peterson remains the primary suspect, though he has never been charged. The case of Drew Peterson stands as a stark reminder of how those entrusted with authority can exploit it for the darkest purposes. Peterson spent nearly 30 years behind a badge, while privately terrorizing the women in his life. He used his knowledge to stage a murder scene, and for 3.5 years, it worked. It was only Stacy's disappearance that finally brought justice for Kathleen. But justice for Stacy remains elusive. 2 women entered Peterson's life, seeking love and partnership. Both were controlled, isolated, and ultimately destroyed. Their stories deserve to be remembered as testaments to lives cut short by a man who betrayed every oath he ever took. If stories like Kathleen Savio's and Stacy Peterson's matter to you, stories that demand accountability, truth, and remembrance, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. These cases aren't just about crime. They're about voices that were silenced and deserve to be heard. Subscribing helps keep these stories alive and ensures the victims are never forgotten. Now, as we move to the next case, we'll see yet another example of how a position of power can hide a deadly double life until the truth finally breaks through. Case number 4. Kenneth Blue, Buena Vista Township, Michigan. This is the story of Kenneth Blue, a police officer in Buena Vista Township, Michigan, whose extramarital relationship resulted in pregnancy, panic, and ultimately premeditated murder. Kenneth Blue served as a police officer with the Buena Vista Township Police Department in Saginaw County, Michigan. On the 30th of August 2011, he became the focus of a homicide investigation following the death of Jennifer Webb, a 32-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant with his child. The case is particularly disturbing not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because Blue was on duty, in uniform, and armed at the time the victim was found. Investigators later concluded that the scene had been staged to appear as a suicide, a conclusion that sharply contrasted with the forensic evidence that followed. Kenneth Blue beginning his career with the Saginaw County Sheriff's Department before later accepting a position with the Buena Vista Township Police Department. His choice to enter law enforcement appeared, on the surface, to be a stable and conventional career path. Blue accepted a position with the Buena Vista Township Police Department in 1999. He spent more than a decade serving in various capacities, responding to routine calls in a community dealing with economic strain and crime. By outward appearances, he was a functioning officer within a small department. There were no major public warnings or incidents that suggested the double life he was living outside of work. Behind that professional exterior, However, Kenneth Blue was involved in a secret romantic relationship with Jennifer Webb. Blue was married and had a family, a fact that was not publicly known in connection with the relationship. The affair was hidden, sustained through deception, and remained largely concealed from those around them. According to trial testimony and investigative findings, Webb believed Blue was separated from his wife, a claim that later proved to be false. Blue maintained strict separation between his personal lives, a compartmentalization that allowed the relationship to continue for years without public exposure. The situation changed dramatically in 2011, when Jennifer Webb discovered she was pregnant. She later told family and close friends that Kenneth Blue was the father. According to those close to her, Webb intended to keep the pregnancy and raise her child, seeking acknowledgement and support rather than public exposure or confrontation. For Blue, the pregnancy represented the potential collapse of the life he had constructed. Exposure would have meant personal, professional, and reputational consequences. Prosecutors later argued that rather than face those consequences, Blue made a deliberate and calculated choice. On the evening of the 30th of August 2011, Jennifer Webb spent time with friends before leaving to meet the father of her unborn child. She told at least one person that she was planning to discuss matters related to the baby's future. That meeting would be the last time she was seen alive. Later that night, Jennifer Webb was found dead in a rural area of Buena Vista Township, near the police department's gun range. Her body was discovered in her vehicle, with an extension cord looped around her neck and attached to the roof rack, creating the appearance of a hanging. At first glance, the scene appeared consistent with suicide. The first officer to notice the vehicle was Officer Tim Patterson, who had been attempting to locate Blue after repeated radio calls went unanswered. Patterson encountered Blue near the scene shortly before the body was discovered. Blue was present and involved during the initial moments after Webb's body was found. His behavior during that period later became a point of scrutiny during the investigation and trial. Due to the involvement of a local police officer, the Michigan State Police were called in to take control of the investigation. Almost immediately, Jennifer Webb's family expressed disbelief that she had taken her own life. That concern was soon validated by forensic findings. The autopsy revealed that Jennifer Webb did not die by hanging. Medical examiners determined that her cause of death was neck compression, consistent with strangulation and inconsistent with suicide. This discovery fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation. As investigators examined Webb's phone records, they found extensive communication between her and Kenneth Blue. DNA testing later confirmed that Blue was the father of her unborn child. The physical and digital evidence directly contradicted the initial appearance of the scene. Based on these findings, prosecutors concluded that Jennifer Webb had been killed and that the scene had been manipulated to conceal the crime. The investigation identified multiple inconsistencies between the suicide narrative and the physical evidence, ultimately pointing to Blue as the person responsible. On the 12th of September 2011, Kenneth Blue was formally arrested. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, assault of a pregnant individual resulting in the death of the fetus, and 2 counts of felony firearm possession. He was held without bond and suspended from duty. The arrest sent shockwaves through Buena Vista Township and the surrounding law enforcement community. A police officer sworn to protect the public now stood accused of murdering a pregnant woman. Blue's trial began in 2012 in Saginaw County Circuit Court. Over the course of several weeks, prosecutors presented extensive forensic, medical, and circumstantial evidence. Medical experts testified regarding the cause of death. Investigators detailed the staged nature of the scene and the digital evidence linking Blue to Webb. The defense attempted to challenge the conclusions but presented limited evidence in response. Kenneth Blue did not testify in his own defense. After deliberating for only a short time, the jury returned a verdict. On the 11th of October 2012, Kenneth Blue was found guilty on all counts. Saginaw County Circuit Court Judge Darnell Jackson sentenced Blue to mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, as required under Michigan law. Additional sentences were imposed for the assault on a pregnant individual and the firearm charges. During sentencing, the court emphasized the calculated nature of the crime and the profound breach of public trust involved. Members of Jennifer Webb's family addressed the court, describing the devastation caused by her death and the loss of her unborn child. Kenneth Blue remains incarcerated within the Michigan Department of Corrections, serving his life sentence. His convictions have been upheld on appeal. He will never again wear a badge, patrol a street, or walk free. The case of Kenneth Blue is a story of power abused and trust betrayed. Jennifer Webb was 32 years old, preparing for motherhood, and looking toward the future. Instead, her life was taken by a man who placed his reputation above her existence. The badge Kenneth Blue wore was meant to symbolize service and protection. In his hands, it became a false shield, one that ultimately failed. 2 lives were lost on a quiet road in Buena Vista Township. Jennifer Webb and her unborn child deserve to be remembered not as the victims of a staged suicide, but as victims of deception, cowardice, and a crime committed by someone sworn to uphold the law. Case number 5. Stephanie Lazarus, LAPD, detective. She wore a badge, investigated crimes, and protected the public. But for 23 years, LAPD detective Stephanie Lazarus hid a murder driven by obsession and jealousy. Stephanie Lazarus was born in 1960 in Southern California. At UCLA, she met John Ruetten, a mechanical engineering major. They occasionally dated from 1978 to 1982. For Lazarus, it was serious. For Ruetten, it was casual friendship with occasional intimacy. That fundamental disconnect would prove fatal. After graduating in 1982, Lazarus joined the LAPD in 1983. She worked patrol in the San Fernando Valley, eventually rising to detective rank. By 2006, she was assigned to the Commercial Crimes Division, working in the nation's only full-time art theft unit. She gained media attention recovering stolen artwork. She married Scott Young, a fellow LAPD detective, adopted a daughter, and overcame thyroid cancer. To everyone around her, she appeared to have built a stable, respectable life. But beneath this carefully constructed existence was an obsession that had never been resolved. After college, Lazarus maintained contact with Ruetten. She still believed they had a future together. Then, in 1984, John Ruetten met Sherry Rasmussen, a brilliant nurse who was director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. She had entered university at 16 and became an internationally recognized critical care nursing lecturer. Ruetten fell in love immediately. Within a year, they were engaged. For Lazarus, this was unacceptable. She called Ruetten and begged him not to marry Rasmussen, confessing her love. Ruetten told her what they had was not a relationship, but Lazarus could not accept it. As the wedding approached, her behavior escalated. She appeared at Rasmussen's hospital office and revealed she and Ruetten had recently been intimate. She showed up at the couple's home in uniform. Sherry told her parents she was receiving threatening calls and being followed. She feared Lazarus was stalking her, sometimes posing as a young man. When Sherry brought this to Ruetten's attention, he dismissed it, suggesting they ignore Lazarus. It was a fatal miscalculation. John and Sherry married in November 1985. On the morning of the 24th of February 1986, Stephanie Lazarus went to the couple's Van Nuys condominium. Ruetten was at work. Only Sherry was home. What happened next was brutal. Lazarus struck Rasmussen in the head with a vase, then shot her 3 times in the chest using a pillow as a silencer. Rasmussen had ligature marks on her wrist and a bite mark on her arm. After killing Sherry, Lazarus staged the scene to look like a botched burglary, pulling out drawers and overturning furniture. Then she left. When John Ruetten returned home that evening, he found his wife dead on the living room floor. The LAPD initially treated it as a home invasion gone wrong. Weeks later, Lazarus reported her off-duty weapon, a .38 caliber handgun, stolen from her car. The murder weapon disappeared in plain sight. Rasmussen's father, Nels, believed Lazarus was the prime suspect. He wrote to the LAPD chief about her confrontations with Sherry. Detectives told him he watched too much television. Despite his pleas, the case went cold. Stephanie Lazarus continued her career, eventually becoming a homicide detective in Van Nuys, the same district where Sherry had been murdered. In 2004, cold case detectives reopened the file. A criminalist discovered the saliva from the bite mark came from a female, undermining the burglary theory. When she asked about the third-party female who had harassed the victim, a supervisor responded with, "Oh, you mean the LAPD detective?" Detective Dan Nuttall took a hard look at Lazarus. The investigation had to be conducted in secret. She worked in the same building. Detectives referred to her only as No. 5 and worked after hours. A surveillance unit followed Lazarus and recovered a discarded cup from a trash can. The DNA matched the bite mark on Rasmussen. On the 9th of June 2009, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested and charged with murder, 23 years after the crime. The revelation shocked the LAPD. A detective with a sterling reputation, a 25-year veteran, was accused of murdering an innocent woman decades earlier. In February 2012, Lazarus stood trial. Prosecutors argued she had been fueled by jealousy. They presented DNA evidence from the bite mark, testimony about her obsessive behavior, and proof she had reported her weapon stolen shortly after the murder. On the 8th of March 2012, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life. In prison, Lazarus presented herself as a model inmate, mentoring others and maintaining excellent behavior. But for years, she maintained her innocence. Only in 2023, seeking special parole consideration, did she publicly admit for the first time that she had killed Sherry. "It makes me sick to this day that I took an oath to protect and serve people, and I took Sherry Rasmussen's life from her," she said. The parole board initially found her suitable for release, but Rasmussen's family challenged the decision. Governor Gavin Newsom noted that while Lazarus had an excellent prison record, she had evaded justice for more than 2 decades and only took responsibility when caught. In October 2024, the parole board rescinded the decision. John Ruetten told commissioners that Lazarus was a master of deception. The board noted her testimony did not match the evidence. Stephanie Lazarus remains incarcerated, serving 27 years to life. The case of Stephanie Lazarus forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power and betrayal. A woman sworn to protect became a killer. She evaded justice for over 2 decades while investigating the crimes of others, walking police station halls, interrogating suspects, building a reputation, all while carrying the knowledge of what she had done. But this case is not just about Stephanie Lazarus. It is about Sherry Rasmussen, a brilliant young nurse killed in her own home for no reason other than another woman's obsession. The Rasmussen family fought for decades to have Sherry's death investigated properly. They endured dismissals, indifference, and institutional resistance. They watched as the woman who killed their daughter continued her career, received promotions, and built a life, while Sherry remained buried and forgotten by the system. Their persistence ultimately brought justice, however delayed. The badge is meant to be a symbol of trust. When that trust is violated, the damage extends far beyond a single crime. Stephanie Lazarus serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when obsession is left unchecked, when warning signs are ignored, and when those in power are shielded from consequences. She is serving a life sentence not just for murder, but for the profound betrayal of everything a badge is supposed to represent. If you found these stories as shocking as we did, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss our next deep dive into the dark, twisted secrets hidden behind the badge.